This is Jonathan. He is an officer in the USAGF. He is equipped with an M1 carbine, some binoculars, and a dream of freedom. God damn it. His task is simple. He must push back the Germans by any means necessary, and he was ready to fill that role. First thing he did was order an M3 Stuart. However, he didn't look at the bill, and now all his funds were gone. The now poor Jonathan ordered a few more troops and got ready for battle. They would take the Sieg River from the nasty Germans, which Jonathan despised with all his heart. His first action on the battlefield was obvious. Get into a truck and command from the back lines as his boys did all the work. This at first seemed to be a good idea. The M3 Stuart he ordered was doing God's work. But then, everything went to shit. Jonathan had ordered his Stuart into an open field, and it wasn't long before a hidden anti-tank hit the Stuart, killing the commander and making the vehicle useless. Oh god, no, fuck. Oh god, get out the tank, oh god. Luckily, most of the crew got out and ran for safety. Realizing all the money he just spent was for naught, Jonathan found his courage and ran to the front to lead his men. Things were only going from bad to worse though. The Germans were making a counterattack, and Jonathan only just started using his gun 2 days ago. To follow this up, Stuart had taken out 2 armored cars, but more armor just kept coming. Jonathan was face to face with a Kubel wagon armed with a machine gun, and anti-tanks were firing on all sides. Jonathan's mind was rattled. He watched as his men were dying, bullets flying on all sides, but his officer training kicked in. He knew he needed to order a flanking attack to take out the German heavy guns. With a few good men, he went for it, crossing the threshold to try to secure the area. He threw some smoke to provide cover, and his squad crawled through it to flank the gun. Jonathan got the first look, taking out a German bastard, but now his cover was blown, and the gun started turning, ready to blow Jonathan away. Get up, Jonathan, run! Run, Jonathan, run! He ran for his life, going into a building and watching as now a German Kubel wagon was driving right past him. He had no bullets, and so he was completely stuck in this house. His boys were trained well though, and only after missing 4 point-blank shots, they took out the machine gunner and the last man on the anti-tank, allowing Jonathan to get free. Unfortunately for Jonathan, he couldn't find any more American ammo, and had to go against his code and use German weapons. While Jonathan was doing his flank, his main front managed to hold off the Germans. However, as Jonathan ran to see if the area was secure, another anti-tank gun fired at him. The Germans had one last holdout that needed to be dislodged. Jonathan ordered his infantry to advance, and only hoped they could find cover before the gun got them. He also ordered his tank crew to repair the Stuart. The German gun plowed through Jonathan's infantry like butter. Men went flying, and when it seemed like more young Americans were about to die, the Stuart was repaired, taking out the anti-tank as it was distracted. After the gun was disabled, all that was left was to secure the area. Jonathan had done it. His first battle was won. He ordered his men to take the German equipment, and his battalion got a chance to rest before the next battle. Hating all things German, Jonathan had the equipment sold so they could buy some new American boys. 2 new engineer battalions and a Browning 1917 were at his disposal for the German counteroffensive. Jonathan prepared his defense to the best of his ability, ordering his men to build trenches in foxholes, setting himself in a comfy little house where he could watch things unfold. However, things soon turned sour as the Germans flanked from the left. Luckily, the veteran crew of the Stuart was ready to go, stopping the flank in its tracks, taking out mortars and any infantry that came its way. But just as things started to go the Americans' way, an anti-air gun began to fire its defense, cutting through the lines like Swiss cheese. Thinking rashly, Jonathan sent his Stuart in to try to disable the gun, but as the Stuart climbed the hill, it once again ran into a hidden anti-tank gun. However, this time, there was no escape from the enemy. Jonathan, seeing his men being massacred, knew he had to climb that hill himself. He took 2 good men with him and started the scale. However, the AA gun could not be found. Deep within enemy lines, Jonathan knew if he stayed here any longer, it would only be a matter of time before he was killed. So, he scaled down, finding a mortar to take out. But, right as he began to fire, his hand slipped, bringing out his binoculars. But, Jonathan has the luck of a madman. The mortar squad missed every shot it took, and he was able to get his gun out, taking out the mortar crew. Yet, it was not enough, as then an MG started firing at his position. Bullets flew and whizzed over his head, but his ungodly luck struck again, and he managed to get behind cover before he could get shot. Jonathan had to get out of enemy territory, but it seemed like an impossible situation. The MG, however, forgot about Jonathan, and it turned the opposite direction, allowing an opportunity for him to escape. Right as he began to crawl away, though, he heard something horrible. His beloved Stuart had turned against him. The Germans had repaired it, and now made it a vessel to kill American boys. Jonathan's ungodly luck came out again as the Stuart missed every shot it took, and he managed to get in position to take out the MG crew, eventually crawling back to friendly territory. The Stuart wasn't done though. It began to fire on his men, taking out the last defenders one by one. Thinking fast, Jonathan grabbed an anti-tank rifle from one of his dead comrades and began to try to get into a position where he could flank the tank, but the Stuart saw him, and it began rolling towards his location. Jonathan got 1 round off, but it wasn't enough. He tried to take cover behind some sandbags, yet he knew this was it. The turret was facing him. It was ready to shoot, and nothing would stop it. Right as Jonathan closed his eyes, and was ready for death. One of his infantrymen shot an anti-tank rifle and killed the crew of the Stuart, saving Jonathan's life. The battle was won, but at the cost of many of Jonathan's battalion. He sold his beloved Stuart to get the newer model and recruited some men for the next offensive. The winter season had come to France, and with the winter came a shitload of German tanks. The new Stuart was alone against them, but using American steel and courage, disabled them one at a time. While a tank war was happening, Jonathan took his boys to secure the area. The fighting was hard, but the American casualties were low, and eventually the Krauts were pushed from the area. Jonathan, once again, started war profiteering, taking all the German tanks from the field and selling them to make his battalion better. He bought a second Stuart and some infantry equipment to make sure no one ran out of bullets. The next German offensive would be halted by American steel. Reality would quickly set in for Jonathan, however, as now, recognizing the American front as a threat, the Germans sent bigger guns. Panzer IIIs now dominated the field, and they made short work of the Stuarts. The defense in depth strategy that Jonathan tried to apply also collapsed as the Germans came in like a steamroller. Armored vehicles that would cut through infantry like butter came in mass. It was just now Jonathan realized perhaps he should have focused on anti-tank weapons, or maybe artillery, but it was too late. All he had was a small anti-tank rifle against what seemed to be the world. German infantry kept advancing from the front, armored vehicles were at his flank, his boys were dying like flies. All hope seemed to be lost as the Germans hit harder and harder. It was only then that the Ostfront gods told the Germans to stop because the Americans had more imaginary points, and Jonathan was saved once again. The casualties had been high, but not irreplaceable. Now, Jonathan reinforced his army with some big planes to back it up, and he felt more prepared than ever before. Once again, his hopes would instantly be crushed with the next American offensive. The Germans were well entrenched, and it seemed they outmatched the Americans in every way. The Stuarts were taken out easily, a single Panzer III shell destroying their advance. Seeing his offensive falter, Jonathan tried to take things in his own hands, but the numbers were too many, and Jonathan's life was nearly ended when a Kübelwagen drove up and gunned him down like a dog in the street. Luckily, his wounds weren't fatal, and a brave medic saved his life, but while he was down, the reinforcements he ordered were massacred, and he was left with only a few good men. Jonathan tried anything to destroy the last Panzer III that hunted the grounds, but nothing he tried would pierce through the armor. Left with no anti-tank rounds, he was forced to run, but nowhere was safe. Jonathan was forced into a small house, fighting multiple Germans by himself. However, Jonathan's luck struck once more, as a random anti-tank mine managed to finish off the Panzer III, and two brave boys left took out the German infantry that walked along with the Panzer III. Once the infantry regrouped with Jonathan, they were able to repair the Stuart and finish off the last of the German guns and camped on the capture point. While the battle was won, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Of all his men, only himself and 3 others remained. Some equipment on the field was salvaged, but a full Stuart had been lost. The reinforced American army was nearly half its size, and they prepared for a hopeful defense. The day started calm. Jonathan ordered his engineers to get ready for the onslaught to begin. Trenches were dug, and mines were placed in preparation for the German steamroller. The attack began from the northwest. German boots began the charge at Jonathan's defensive position, but it seemed like the line was holding. The Stuart had learned from its previous mistakes, and tried its best to stay in the back, covering infantry and taking out any tanks it could see, but it would not last. The Stuart went in for a slight advance to try to get a better angle on a Panzer III, only for a direct hit to kill the gunner and heavily damage the tank, making it fall back. A flanking maneuver came from the northeast, and more tanks began to envelop the American defense. To make things go from bad to worse, the anti-tank gun Jonathan had ordered couldn't get a line of sight on the advancing tanks. Its crew was soon annihilated due to the previous flanking maneuver. Jonathan, seeing the situation, ordered 3 bombing runs to try to take out the armor coming from the northwest, and while this was successful, the German armor wouldn't stop coming. More tanks came from the east, and Jonathan tried to man the anti-tank gun, but it was too damaged to fire. The evidence was clear. A retreat needed to happen. Jonathan grabbed any men nearby and tried to fall back to the American encampment to the south, but as they were finding cover and planning the retreat, a German artillery gun locked at the position, a shell hitting right at Jonathan's feet. Oh, get up! Get up! His vision blurred as he laid in the dirt. All of his men lay dead next to him, and he felt blood leaking from the shrapnel encasing his body. But he had somehow lived, and he needed to get out of there now, if there was any hope of survival. No matter where he looked, he saw German armor waiting for him. The defense was nearly enveloped. Using the last of his strength, he got up and ordered a full retreat, trying to save as many of his men as possible. Jonathan ran for the other defense site, making it without a scratch. The same couldn't be said for the rest of his troops. They took heavy casualties in the retreat effort, but some had managed to make it out. Jonathan, now seeing his boys safe, ran for deeper cover, but he never saw the Panzer II waiting for him, and it began to fire. The first few shots missed, but Jonathan's luck finally ran out. His time as an American officer was over. He lay in the red snow, thinking of home, before he closed his eyes for the last time. His boys would not last much longer. They had been surrounded, and while they could take out 1 tank, 2 more would eventually show up, and after a certain point, nothing they threw could pierce through the panzers. Eventually, they were all wiped out. Jonathan lay lifeless under the American flag as it fell to be replaced with a German one. So ends the tale of Jonathan, the American officer who had gotten so far, survived so much, but did not see the end of war.
Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more.
Subscribe to Classic Ash.
My grandfather said this mummy is worth millions.